previously I had mentioned that I was going to use 10,000 styrene, but after looking at the 10,000s, I thought it was a little bit too thin, so I bumped that to 15 thousandths of an inch styrene. I cut two 3/8 inch wide strips. That gives me 3/16 of an inch on both the bottom and the top. Alright, let's see how well it stuck the two halves together, and hopefully I didn't stick it to the fuselage. Well, this is not a good sign so far. So this side over here is okay. I've already used the ruler over here, but this side, I think I got a little too much glue. Ah, there we go. I think we have it. Alright, so the cowl is basically joined. Like I said, I still want to go in and add some fiberglass strips everywhere else. I think I will go in and add some styrene up here. But yeah, I think I'm pretty happy with this. An initial attachment with CA, just to get the parts stuck together and hopefully stay in alignment before I can add the fiberglass. To reinforce the seam and also the styrene strip here, I'm using a piece of 2 ounce per square yard fiberglass and running it the full length, and then I'll just rub in some thin CA to this. Both sides are done. I did use a plastic baggie to rub in the thin CA. Makes it really super easy. You get a nice smooth surface doing it that way, and this should work very nicely for holding the seam together. After a heavy coat of high build gray primer and after a black guide coat, it is a little heavy. I only had a little bit of paint left in the can, so I went ahead and emptied it on the cowl. About halfway through the sanding back of the guide coat and the primer, and you can see here now why I like the black guide coat. With this light gray primer, it's really hard for me to see little depressions, pits, pinholes, things like that. But the black primer or the black guide coat really brings these little imperfections out. Since this is going to be painted in a gloss white paint, I really need to make sure this is as nice as I can possibly make it. And then after I've done that part, then comes the filler. Sometimes I get a little carried away with the filler. That's the OCD in me. The initial sanding of the cowl is complete, with the exception of the nose ring here. Now, I'm going to have a problem, and I knew this from the beginning. The fiberglass here and here pulled away as it was curing, and so I have a couple of raised areas. This one is worse. So I have a real risk of actually going completely through the fiberglass on these two spots. So to mitigate that, I removed the plywood ring, did a little bit of surgery up here, and then I epoxied it into the front of the cowl. So that would give me good support for the back of the fiberglass. And what will probably end up happening is I'll sand completely through and then have to add some more fiberglass to smooth this all out. The cowl has had all of its little imperfections filled with automotive putty, sanded back, wet sanded. Took a couple applications, but I think it's in pretty good shape now. And now it's ready for another coat of primer. But before I do that, it's time to start thinking about mounting this thing. Now, one thing I really hate to see are screws sticking on the side of a cowl like most models are. That just really annoys me. And I won't do that if I have a good way to mount it from the inside. In this case, I think I do. Now, I still need to open up the air inlets in the front. Haven't done that yet. But what I need to do now is to remove my foam plug. What I want to do is have a couple of angle brackets. I glue angle brackets to the side of the cowl, and then the other angle gets screwed in from the inlets back into the fuselage. Not really the firewall. The firewall would be up here, but back into the fuselage. When I cut my firewalls for electric motors, I usually cut them just a little bit oversized. Oversized gives me a little bit of adjustability this way. This was some scrap. It's 1/4 inch birch ply, so it was the right thickness I needed. And ended up being about 1/8 of an inch oversized on the sides and about 1/4 of an inch oversized top and bottom. Moving on with mounting the motor to the fuselage. First, let me show you how I set this up. Normally I will rest my model on a couple of wood bar clamps that I have so that it sits somewhat vertical and somewhat secure, that it won't fall off. Usually inside the wing leading edge works well. Alright, ready to epoxy in the firewall. I mixed up some 30-minute epoxy and added a little bit of colloidal silica to it just to make it a little bit thick so it's not runny. You'll notice notches in the top and bottom of the leading edge of the battery box. That's for the flanges of the T-nuts. I forgot to take those into account when I was coming up with the dimensions for the battery box. One last thing I did was I added some Vaseline to the bolts. The bolts will be kind of close to the edges where the epoxy is. So that's to hopefully prevent them from sticking. Epoxy is thoroughly cured. Oh yeah, that worked out really nice. It's basically right where I placed it into position. So got this all cleaned up, removing all the excess blue foam, and then I added some gussets to 3 sides of the firewall. The 4th side is flush, so I didn't add anything here. So I got the motor back reinstalled, and I put the cowl back on, kind of see where I was sitting with it. And I was initially surprised that to get the bearing out past the cowl, I had quite a bit of overhang in the back here. So I went to the plans and I measured from the firewall to the face here, and on the plans it's 6 9/16. So I came here and I measured it, and mine comes out to 6 13/16. So that's 4/16 or about 1/4 inch long. Well, it just so happens that my firewall is 1/4 inch. So I guess I did not do a good measurement with the battery box. This ends up being 1/4 inch too long, but you know, I guess too long is better than too short. Sorting out the back plate and rubbing against the bottom of the cowl ring, the first thing I did was I took a look at the plans and the longitudinal datum that's drawn on it, and it goes all the way to the back, and I measured the distance from the datum down to the bottom of the fuselage, and I drew that line out on the fuselage, and I got the laser level going, and I drew a line from the top of the battery box down, and so the laser goes through that, and it pretty much bisects the cowl where I joined it, except for up here a little bit, and that might just be from sanding and shaping, and then when I actually join the two halves. But by looking at that, you can see that the cowl actually sits a little bit below the spinner back plate, and also I noticed that the line from the canopy back, it kind of raises up a little bit, kind of like curves upward. So unfortunately, I think that tells me that I'm going to have to reposition the firewall, and I might be able to kill two birds with one stone on that one. The prop thrust washer, it sticks out about 1/4 inch too far forward. So if I cut the firewall off and shorten it just a little bit and then reposition it, then I think that might take care of everything all at once. To mount the cowl, I'm going to try to mount it from the inside. I've cut a couple of angle brackets from 20 gauge steel. They were cut with a Dremel cutting wheel and then bent to shape. One half gets glued to the cowl, and then the other half of it will be screwed in to former F1. I do believe I can get access for screwing in to the former from the intake openings in the cowl, and I think I have a tool, a driver long enough that'll reach. So the first thing to do is to glue the bracket to the cowl. And what I have already done to both brackets is to use a diamond file and cut in some deep scratches into the steel, give the epoxy a fighting chance of holding on to the bracket. To actually glue the bracket in, I'll be using a pair of forceps. They're long enough to where I can fit the bracket in. I've already tested a little bit with the real cowl, and there's enough working room. What I'll do is I'll put a big blob of epoxy on the bracket, snake the forcep in, try to kind of get it to position, and then really just let it sit and let it harden up. The reason I'm showing you this over the plan is because there's not really enough room on the cowl itself to really show you what's going on, and I don't have a good way to mount the camera in a place that you can take a good video of it. So I'm going to show you here. After the epoxy mix on my brackets cured, it took a little bit of effort to pop the cowl free. I guess they were pretty well stuck down to the clear packing tape I had used. But anyway, it took a few wraps on the top and bottom to finally get the cowl to break free. So here it is, and you can see the brackets. Now you'll notice that I put one bracket on top of the mid cowl joint line, and then I put one bracket below there. I might end up adding another two for a total of 4 brackets, but we'll see how these go first. Now I did make a little bit of a tactical mistake. I think I should have drilled my holes for my screws before I glued these in, actually before I even bent them, to tell you the truth. But I'm gonna see if I can't try to get a couple of holes drilled. So I guess I got a little bit lucky and it worked. Did not break the brackets off. Screws are where they will be. So if you do this, do yourself a big favor and drill the holes before you glue in the brackets. Cowl's back on the fuselage and it's hanging vertically again. Trying to get the holes at least marked and maybe started for the brackets using this center drill. Let's see if I can show you this. I can't get the top out enough to really turn it, so I'm just going to try to get it started. I did manage to get the holes started. There's one there and the other one here. It's kind of hard to see in the primer, but they're both started. Oh, you two kids. All right, so I got the holes drilled. I added some 1/4" ply in the back, so that gives me about, I don't know, 5/16 worth of ply or something like that for the screws. Plenty strong. I'm having to use a long skinny screwdriver, and I had to add some silicone adhesive to the tip. Otherwise the screw would fall off as I tried to put it inside the cowl. And anyway, it's nice and tight, fits good. I think for an electric powered model this should be sufficient, but again, I have the option to add a couple more brackets if I need to. Now that the cowl is set up with its brackets, everything is set there. Time to remove the firewall. First thing I want to do is remove the gussets. They're easily replaceable. I'm going to use a Japanese flush cut saw for this. Cutting out the firewall, I can't really cut the firewall flush with the battery box separate here because of my T-nuts. The T-nuts are pretty well captured. Some of the epoxy from gluing in the firewall has captured the T-nuts. And I want to keep them with the firewall as well. So I need to cut back a little bit, and I'm just going to use the compass here to try to mark a line to cut, which avoids the T-nuts. Firewall was cleaned up, got the old stuff off of it, and the battery box was also cleaned up. It was sanded with a block sander, and now the sides are all level with each other. Because I did remove some material here, but quite a bit of material here, probably 3/16 of an inch, maybe more between cutting and sanding, I'm going to have to add some more material to the firewall. I think I'll do it to the face of the firewall instead of putting it on the battery box. With some measuring, I determined that I'm going to need an additional 1/4 inch to raise the prop mount up to about 2 mm or about 1/16 of an inch above the cowl opening. So, take another scrap piece of 1/4 inch ply. Easy to mark the holes, but what I didn't have was really a good way to drill the holes and have them match up with my existing T-nuts. If they get off just a little bit, then there might get some binding, you know, when it's time to screw them in. So what I came up with was I drew the oval mount holes in the back plate, drill them on the plywood, and then I rested the top plywood over the bottom piece, and then I just whacked each bolt with a hammer, and that gave me a nice indent. So now I think I can drill these. Alright, that worked out pretty well. Holes actually lined up really well, except for one. There's always one. But what I had to end up doing was taking the T-nut out, putting the bolt through, and then lining up the T-nut and tightening it down. And that got it all sorted out. So you can see I had just a little bit of right thrust here based on the spinner backplate, and that's confirmed with my laser level. The side is actually looking pretty good. So what I need to do is to sand down a little bit on this side of the battery box. I just want to sand this side of the battery box, so tape protects this edge, and China marker witness marks shows my progress. I think that has just about got it. It took several iterations of sanding and then applying more tape and more sanding. But I think I have at this point a nice even gap all the way around between the spinner back plate and the cowl. It's about 1/16 of an inch. Right now the motor is just placed into position. So let's glue it in. Sides have been sanded back to their final shape. I think they're looking pretty good, sides and the bottom. And the two openings in the front of the cowl, they've been opened up to the right size. Now the real airplane, these openings, they round over to go inside a little bit. So I'm going to add a little bit of balsa to try to simulate that. Alright, we've got the balsa strip sanded back along with the red spot putty that I'd added. They've been given a round over. Now I want to give it some sanding sealer. I think I'll give it about 4 coats. This balsa is going to be the same color as the outside, so I really don't want to see any grain. I think 4 coats of the sealer will do that for me. And then we'll give it a prime and see how it looks. The cowl is really starting to come together. I put on a single coat of a spray can primer, and overall it's looking pretty good. Now you can see that I opened up the cowl ring a little bit, and then I applied some spot putty to smooth out some areas. The 4 coats of the sanding sealer did a really nice job of filling the balsa grain, and you can't see any grain underneath this primer, so that worked really well. The one thing though that I'm going to have to still work on, I'm not real happy about, the size of these openings is not symmetrical. You can see that there's a little more of a lip here than here. So I think what I want to do is I want to add a 1 mm strip of balsa here. That will increase the size of this lip a little bit, and I think bring the height-wise of these openings about the same. Cowl, I think I can pretty much call done. I ended up adding 2 mm worth of balsa to this side to narrow this width a little bit, make it more in line with this. And it looks better. There are some flaws. It's not perfect. For example, this side is a little too close to the cowl ring as opposed to this side. You probably can see from this angle. And I didn't change the width of this opening. This lip is still a little bit smaller than this one. But I think overall for this model, it looks okay. This should work. So just a quick, it's been given a coat of primer, and I think I'm going to end up probably sanding a little bit more. But we'll just kind of show you overall what it looks like. And if I had to do it over again, I would soften some of the edges, especially on the top of the cowl and the demarcation from where it slopes downward towards the spinner. That area is a little bit sharp, and it really should have been softened up a little bit.